The Buried Memory, The Hunt for the Nazi Microfilm Caches, Part 1, The Celluloid Insurance Policy. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. When we think of the end of World War II, we think of physical destruction. We think of the burning Reichstag, the rubble of Dresden, the blown-up bridges. We picture the Nazis destroying their history, SS officers frantically throwing files into bonfires and courtyards as the Russians approached. And that happened. Millions of pages of incriminating evidence would turn to ash in the spring of 1945. But there was another instinct at play in the dying days of the Reich, a survival instinct. Many high-ranking Nazis realized that the war was lost, but they believed that they might survive. And to survive, they needed leverage. They needed information. They needed to prove to the Allies that they were useful. Or they needed to preserve the glory of the Reich for future generations. So while the paper burned, the cameras clicked. In the final year of the war, a massive secret operation took place to transfer the most vital secrets of the German state onto microfilm. These rolls of film were placed in watertight metal canisters. They were driven out of Berlin in the dead of night. They were hidden in salt mines, buried in lonely forests, sunken in alpine lakes, and walled up in medieval castles. In this series, we're going to tell the story of the greatest treasure hunt of the Cold War. Not a hunt for gold, but a hunt for information. We will see how a rebellious diplomat buried the secrets of the German Foreign Office in a forest to save his own skin. We will see how Hitler's spy master Reinhard Gehlen buried his files on the Soviet Union to buy a job with the CIA. And we will see how the Allies scrambled to find these microfilm caches before the Nazis could use them to escape. Title card: The Buried Memory. Chapter 1: The Paper War. To understand the value of these caches, you have to understand the German obsession with documentation. The Nazi state was a machine of paper. Every aspect of the genocide, every military maneuver, every diplomatic betrayal was typed up in triplicate. But by 1943, the Allied bombing campaign was destroying the archives. The Ministry of the Interior, the Foreign Office, and the Wehrmacht realized their history was being erased by firebombs. So, the order went out: Sicherungsverfilmung, security filming. Special photographic squads were set up. They worked day and night photographing millions of documents. Microfilm was the perfect medium for a collapsing empire. It was fire resistant, it was stored properly, it was durable, and most importantly, it was compact. You could fit the entire personnel record of an SS division into a shoebox. You could fit the secret treaties of the foreign minister in a canister the size of a thermos. So, by 1945, as the Red Army crossed the Oder River, the order changed from preserve to hide. Berlin was doomed. The government began to fracture. Ministries fled to the north, to the south, to the mountains, and in their luggage, they carried the steel drums filled with film. Chapter 2: The Foreign Office Treasure, the von Loesch story. The most dramatic story concerns the German Foreign Office, the Auswärtiges Amt. These files contain the darkest diplomatic secrets of the Reich: the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, the deals with fascist puppet states, the records of gold looted from Jews and sent to Swiss banks. Joachim Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, gave a strict order: if the end comes, destroy everything. The enemy must find nothing. But one man disobeyed: Karl von Loesch. He was a mid-level diplomat, an interpreter and archivist for Ribbentrop. By April 1945, the Foreign Office had evacuated to the Harz Mountains. Ribbentrop was in a panic. He ordered the paper files burned. But the microfilm, that was von Loesch's responsibility. Von Loesch looked at the chaos around him. He saw the fanaticism of his bosses, and he made a cold calculation. If I destroy these films, I am just another Nazi functionary facing a hangman. If I keep them, I have a bargaining chip. He took 26 metal canisters. They contained the most sensitive diplomatic correspondence to the entire war. He didn't fondle Ribbentrop's convoy. Instead, he took a small team and drove deep into the forest near the Schloss Marburg Castle. It was a scene out of a spy novel. In the dead of night, von Loesch and his men dug a hole in a nondescript patch of woods. They wrapped the canisters in oilcloth to protect them from the damp. They buried them. They covered the spot with leaves and branches. Then, Von Loesch went back to his quarters, put on civilian clothes, and waited for the British army to arrive. He held the map to the secrets of the Third Reich in his head, and he was ready to make a deal. Chapter 3. The Spy Who Sold the East, Reinhard Gehlen. While von Loesch was burying diplomatic papers, a more sinister figure was burying military intelligence. General Reinhard Gehlen, he was the head of Fremde Heere Ost, Foreign Armies East. He was Hitler's spy master on the Eastern Front. His department knew everything about the Soviet Union. They knew the order of battle of the Red Army. They knew the locations of Soviet factories. They knew the names of NKVD agents. Gehlen was a realist. He knew as early as 1944 that Germany would lose. He also knew that as soon as Germany fell, the Western allies, America and Britain, would eventually turn against their ally, the Soviet Union. And when that happened, they would need him. Gehlen played a dangerous game. In early 1945, he orders his staff to microcopy all their intelligence on Russia. He packed the films in watertight steel drums. He fled to the Bavarian Alps, the supposed national redoubt. There, in various secret locations, meadows, bars, mountain caves, Gehlen buried his treasure. He ordered his officers to scatter and wait for his signal. He said to his paymen, "We will not surrender as prisoners. We will surrender as partners." When the American Counterintelligence Corps captured Gehlen in May 1945, they thought he was just another German general. They put him in a POW camp. Gehlen was furious. He demanded to see a senior officer. He said, "I am General Gehlen, and I have the keys to the Soviet Union. If you treat me well, I'll give them to you. If you don't, the Russians will find them." The Americans were skeptical, but then Gehlen took them to the first burial site. They dug up the drums, they opened them. Inside was the most comprehensive intelligence database on the Red Army in existence. Gehlen didn't just buy his freedom, he bought a career. These microfilms became the foundation of the BND and the crucial asset for the CIA.
Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. The Dustbin Teams. By May 1945, the Allies realized what was happening. They formed special intelligence teams. The British had Force T, the Americans had the Alsos mission, looking for nuclear secrets, and the Target Intelligence Committee, TICOM. Their job was to sift through the rubble and find the paper trails. They established interrogation centers with code names like Dustbin at Kronsberg Castle and Ashcan in Luxembourg. They brought the captured Nazi bureaucrats there and grilled them. Where are the files? Did you burn them? Did you bury them? It was a race against time and against the Soviets. The Red Army had its own trophy brigades. They were scouring Berlin, seizing every piece of paper they could find. The American teams were driving around Germany in jeeps following rumors. A farmer would say, "I saw SS men digging in the woods last night." A captured secretary would whisper, "My boss took a box to the lake." The TICOM teams would rush to the site. Sometimes they found nothing, sometimes they found ashes, but sometimes their shovels hit metal. One of the strangest finds was the NSDAP Central Membership File. The Nazis had tried to destroy the list of all party members. They sent the paper cards to a paper mill in Munich to be pulped, but the mill ran out of coal before they could destroy them all. When the Americans arrived, they found millions of cards, the identity of every Nazi in Germany, just sitting there, waiting to be read. But the real prize, the microfilm archives of the leadership, was still missing. Transition to Part 2. The war is over. The guns are silent. Karl von Loesch is sitting in a British detention camp, sweating. He wonders if he should talk. Reinhard Gehlen is sitting in an American camp, smiling, knowing his plan is working. And deep in the forests of Germany, beneath the roots of the trees, the secrets of the Third Reich are waiting in their steel coffins. In the next part, we will cover the discovery. We will walk into the damp forest with the British officers as von Loesch leads them to the spot. We will see the race to secure the Göring collection, the private art and financial records of the Reichsmarschall hidden in a tunnel. And we will explore the battle between the U.S. State Department and the Army over who got to keep the secrets that could start World War III. Make sure you're subscribed. The hunt is about to get dirty. End of Part 1. This is Part 2 of the documentary series. In this section, we move from the burial to the excavation. This is the moment when the dustbin teams struck gold. We uncovered the sensational discovery of the Marburg files, which threatened the British royal family, the deal that created the modern CIA, and the massive trove of Nazi party records that became the tool for hunting war criminals. Here is the full narrative text for voiceover. The Buried Memory. The Hunt for the Nazi Microfilm Caches. Part 2. The Devil's Bargain. Welcome back. In Part 1, we watched as the Third Reich collapsed, and its functionaries, diplomats, spies, and bureaucrats scrambled to bury their secrets in the forests and mountains of Germany. They treated these rolls of microfilm not as history, but as currency. They were life insurance policies in metal canisters. Now, it is May 1945. The shooting has stopped, but the digging has begun. Allied intelligence officers are driving jeeps through the ruined German countryside. They're following rumors, bribing locals with cigarettes, and interrogating exhausted prisoners. They are looking for the X on the map. In this episode, we are going to open those canisters. And what we find inside will do more than just explain the war. It will threaten to topple the British monarchy, launch the Cold War, and decide the fate of millions of Germans during the denazification trials. The Marburg Files. The Royal Scandal. Let's start with the most explosive find of them all. The treasure buried by the rebellious diplomat Karl von Loesch. Von Loesch was sitting in a British detention camp. He was nervous. He knew that if he waited too long, the damp soil of the forest would destroy the films. He asked to speak to a senior officer. He was introduced to Lieutenant Colonel Thompson of the British Army. Von Loesch made his offer. I can give you the archives of the German Foreign Office, but you must guarantee my safety. Thompson agreed. On the rainy day in late May 1945, a convoy of British trucks followed von Loesch back to the woods near Schloss Marburg. The diplomat pointed to a patch of disturbed earth covered in leaves. The British soldiers started digging. A few feet down, their shovels hit metal. They pulled up 26 canisters. They were heavy, cold, and covered in mud. They were rushed to London for analysis. When the intelligence analysts held the negatives up to the light, they realized they were looking at a political nuclear bomb. These weren't just trade agreements. These were the Ribbentrop files. And buried among them was a specific folder that terrified the British government. It became known as the Windsor File. These documents detailed the relationship between the Nazis and the former King of England, the Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII. The microfilm contained telegrams suggesting that the Duke was sympathetic to Hitler. It contained details of a Nazi plot to kidnap the Duke and reinstall him as a puppet king of England if Germany won the war. It showed the Duke criticizing Churchill and calling for peace with Germany. This was dynamite. If this leaked to the press in 1945, it could bring down the British monarchy. Winston Churchill wanted to destroy the microfilms. He wanted to burn them to protect the crown. But the American historians and intelligence officers said no. They argued that history belongs to the world, not the king. A secret battle raged behind closed doors for years. Eventually, the files were preserved, but kept secret for decades. The Marburg find proved that the microfilm caches were not just historical records. They were weapons that could still hurt the victors. The spy who came in from the cold. The Galen deal. While the British were panicking over the Duke of Windsor, the Americans were making a deal with the devil in the Bavarian Alps. General Reinhard Galen, Hitler's spy master, had buried his intelligence on the Soviet Union in steel drums scattered across the mountains. He sat in an American POW camp, waiting. When the U.S. Army finally realized who he was, they didn't put him on trial. They put him on a plane. In a move that was kept secret from the public, Galen, a Nazi general, was flown to Fort Hunt, Virginia. There, he laid out his cards. He told the Americans, "You know nothing about the Russians. You think they are your allies. I know they are your enemy. I have the maps. I have the names of their agents. I have the location of every division in the Red Army." "Where is this information?" the CIA asked. "It is on microfilm, buried in the Alps." The deal was struck. The Americans went back to Bavaria, dug up the drums, and shipped the film to Washington. In exchange, Galen was not prosecuted. In fact, he was hired. He returned to West Germany and set up the Galen Organization, funded by U.S. dollars. This organization eventually became the BND, the modern German Secret Service. For the next 10 years, the CIA's view of the Soviet Union was shaped almost entirely by microfilm collected by the Nazis. It was a pragmatic, cynical decision. The U.S. government decided that the Cold War was more important than justice. The buried film bought Galen a second career. The Tambach Archive. The Battle of the Atlantic. Not all treasures were buried in the dirt. Some were hiding in plain sight. The German Navy, Kriegsmarine, had always been a separate breed. Grand Admiral Dönitz was proud of his U-boats. As the war ended, Dönitz ordered the naval archives to be moved to Schloss Tambach near Coburg. Unlike the Foreign Office or the SS, the Navy didn't panic. They didn't burn their records. When the British commandos captured the castle, they found the archive almost perfectly intact. Millions of pages, logs, and charts. Why does this matter? Because of the U-boats. The British were desperate to understand how the Germans had nearly strangled England. They wanted the technical blueprints of the advanced torpedoes. They wanted the tactical logs of the wolf packs. They filmed everything. These microfilms became the textbook for the NATO navies. The modern submarine tactics of the US and UK during the Cold War were built on the lessons learned from the Tambach archive. It was a clean capture. No deals, no blackmail, just pure military science transferred from the loser to the winner.
The Berlin Document Center, the Book of Judgment. But the most massive and perhaps the most terrifying find wasn't buried in the forest. It was found in a paper mill. We mentioned this briefly in part 1, but the scale of it deserves a closer look. The NSDAP Central Membership File. This was the physical list of every single person who had ever joined the Nazi Party. 10 million cards. The Nazis had sent it to Munich to be pulped, turned into paper mush, to hide the identities of their members. But the mill had run out of coal. The machine stopped. When the Americans arrived, they found the cards stacked in neat rows, waiting to be destroyed. This wasn't microfilm yet, it was paper. But the Americans realized its value instantly. They seized the cards and created the Berlin Document Center, BDC. They began a massive project to microfilm every single card. This cache became the Book of Judgment. In the chaotic years of 1945 to 1948, every German claimed they were innocent. "I was never a Nazi," they said. "I hated Hitler." The Allies would simply check the microfilm. "Oh, really? Here is your card. You joined in 1933. You paid your dues every month until April 1945. This microfilm was used to vet every judge, every policeman, and every teacher in the new West Germany. It was the primary tool of denazification. Without this accidental survival, thousands of hardcore Nazis would have slipped back into power. The Soviet trophy brigades, the looting of history. We have focused on the Western allies, but what about the Russians? The Red Army had special trophy brigades. Their orders were simple: take everything. While the Americans were looking for specific intelligence, the Soviets were vacuuming up entire archives. They captured the Harz Archive, the German Army archive, in a burning train outside Potsdam. They shipped tons of documents to Moscow. For decades, these files disappeared into the special archive of the KGB. This created a divided history. The West had the diplomatic files, Marburg, and the party records, BDC. The East had the military operational records and the construction plans for the concentration camps, which were built by SS construction brigades. This split had real-world consequences. When the West tried to prosecute generals for war crimes, they often lacked the specific orders because those orders were sitting in a box in Moscow. The Soviets used their cash as a weapon. Every time a West German politician annoyed them, the KGB would release a file from the archive, showing that the politician had been a Nazi officer. It was a slow-drip blackmail that lasted for 40 years. Transition to Part 3. By 1950, the great treasure hunt was mostly over. The forests had been dug up, the castles had been emptied. Millions of feet of microfilm sat in vaults in Washington, London, and Moscow. But the story didn't end there. A new battle began, a battle over ownership. Germany wanted its history back. The West German government argued, "These are our documents. You cannot keep our national memory hostage." The US and UK argued, "You can't be trusted with them. You might destroy the evidence." In the final part of this series, we will cover the return. We will see how the Allies spent decades microfilming the captured documents so they could keep a copy before sending the originals back to Germany. We will look at the controversy of the burned files, the secrets that remain lost forever. And we will answer the final question: did the gamble pay off? Did the men who buried the canisters save their skins, or did they just provide the rope for their own hangings? Make sure you are subscribed. The final chapter deals with the legacy of the microfilms and how they are still hunting war criminals today.
The Buried Memory. The Hunt for the Nazi Microfilm Caches. Part 3. The Eternal Witness. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the final chapter of our series on the Nazi microfilm caches. In Part 1, we saw the panic of 1945 as diplomats and spies buried their secrets in the German earth. In Part 2, we watched the Allies dig them up, uncovering the Marburg files and the massive Nazi Party membership list that became the Book of Judgment. But the story didn't end when the digging stopped. In fact, the strangest chapter was just beginning. Imagine a scenario where the history of your country, your birth records, your political history, your military orders, is owned by a foreign power. For 40 years, the history of Germany wasn't located in Berlin or Bonn. It was located in a converted torpedo factory in Alexandria, Virginia, and a secure compound in West Berlin guarded by American GIs. Today, we are going to look at the battle for ownership of the past. We will see how these microfilms were used to hunt the last Nazis in the 1980s and 90s. And we will try to answer the question: is there anything still buried out there? The Torpedo Factory, the warehouse of history. By the late 1940s, the United States had shipped tons of captured German documents across the Atlantic. They ended up in an old torpedo factory on the banks of the Potomac River in Alexandria, Virginia. This was the headquarters of the Captured Records Section. Inside, it was a hive of activity. Hundreds of historians, translators, and intelligence officers worked day and night. Their job was massive: microfilm everything. The Americans knew they couldn't keep the original paper documents forever. International law and diplomatic pressure meant that eventually they would have to return these archives to the new West German government. But the U.S. didn't trust the Germans yet. They feared that if they returned the files, embarrassing or incriminating documents might accidentally fall into a shredder. So the policy was simple: we give back the paper, but we keep the film. It was an industrial undertaking.
They photographed millions of pages. The Alexandria microfilms became the gold standard for historians. If you wanted to write a book about the SS, you didn't go to Germany. You went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. This created a strange dynamic. The American government knew more about the inner workings of the Third Reich than the Germans did. The fight for the Berlin Document Center. But the crown jewel remained in Berlin. The Berlin Document Center, BDC. This was the repository of the 10 million Nazi Party membership cards we found in Part 2. Unlike the other archives, these stayed in Germany, but they were legally U.S. territory. The center was run by the U.S. State Department. For decades, this created tension. If a German chancellor wanted to appoint a new minister, he had to quietly ask the Americans, "Can you check the BDC? Was he a Nazi?" It was humiliating for the German government. They were a sovereign nation, but they had to ask permission to see their own citizens' files. The West German government demanded the return of the center in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The U.S. always said, "Not yet." Why? Because of the Holocaust hunters. Organizations like the Simon Wiesenthal Center lobbied Washington hard. Do not give the files back to the Germans, they argued. They will bury them. They will protect their grandfathers. It wasn't until 1994, 4 years after the reunification of Germany, that the U.S. finally handed over control of the Berlin Document Center to the German Federal Archives. It was the symbolic end of the occupation. But by then, the Americans had microfilmed every single card. The truth was safe in Washington. The Soviet deep freeze. While the West was slowly returning files, the East was a black hole. The Soviet Union had captured the death books of Auschwitz, the construction logs and death registries. They had captured the SS personnel files from the Race and Settlement Office. For 45 years, these documents sat in the Special Archive in Moscow. They were state secrets. Western historians knew they existed, but they couldn't see them. This created a lost half of history. We knew the diplomatic secrets, thanks to von Loesch, but we missed the operational details of the Holocaust machinery that the Soviets heralded.